preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening. I'm Robert Gilson, Director of the Art Center at the 92nd Street Y. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our programs, we offer courses in fine arts, fine crafts, and photography to adults, children, and teens. Our next semester begins the week of February 12th, and should you be interested, our catalogs are available in the racks downstairs. One course which might be of interest to this particular audience is a new course we're offering called Contemporary Arts Beyond Trends, offered by Stephen Rosenberg, who's a gallery owner in Soho. Our guest this evening is sculptor Robert Arneson. Mr. Arneson, along with such iconoclastic figures as Peter Volkos and Viola Frey, has helped to redefine the parameters of clay as an expressive medium. The moderator for Artist Visions is Patterson Sims, Associate Director of Art and Exhibitions and Curator of Modern Art at the Seattle Museum. Prior to that, he was Associate Director of the Permanent Collection at the Whitney Museum, where he made significant contributions to the literature of contemporary art. While at the Whitney, Mr. Sims curated many important exhibitions, including Traditions and Modernism in American Art, 1900 to 1925, and Figure and Subject, the Revival of Figuration since 1975. Mr. Sims is a distinguished writer and lecturer who has written catalogs for many important exhibitions. My good friend and former colleague, Laura Kaminsky, is very fond of Patterson's taste in ties. So I wore this, one of my favorites, in his honor. Without any further ado, please welcome Patterson Sims to introduce tonight's guest. Thank you.
Yeah, well, my tie looks like I'm a banker. Anyway, anger, laughter, sorrow, a certain amount of despair are all some of the emotions that one feels as one looks at the very expressive work of Robert Arneson. He's a sculptor who really has changed feelings about people, about art history, our sense of art history, and about circumstances in our society and in the world today. Bob has had over 70 one-person, one-artist exhibitions. Over 125 group exhibitions have included and featured his work. He had a retrospective organized by the Des Moines Art Museum, which traveled on to Oakland, to the Portland Museum, and to the Hirshhorn in 1986 and 1987, where his work was surveyed. Bob will perform that same kind of act for all of us tonight in slides by surveying what he has done. I just can't resist showing his first slide, which I shouldn't be doing, but here's his first slide, and here's Bob.
Oh, there I am. Thank you. Actually, a performing artist here as well. This is the artist as a container and as a vessel. And I use this as a good beginning to, we're going to do a little overview of my work tonight, introduce you to where I've come from and where I've been and where I'm going. I don't know where I'm going, where I am now. And this is a work from quite a number of years ago where I was actually doing a demonstration on a potter's wheel. I come from a pottery background in terms of my training. And so in the sense, one has to think of themselves eventually as becoming vesselized. And it's been, as I think about it, an ongoing basis for much of my work. Here's an early beginning, really early beginning. I'm in 1957. I really had the notion of becoming a potter, looking at Bernard Leach. And but if you look closely, and I don't know how this image arrived on there, but you'll see the Mona Lisa. And I don't know how she got there. And I don't have any answers. But as a young potter growing up in California, there was a primary influence on my work was, other than Bernard Leach, which didn't last very long because I didn't really want to be a village potter, was the work of Peter Vokas, who was a primary force on liberating the notion of pottery as a craft, as a menial activity, or as a servitude or making utilitarian kinds of works, to works that would be viewed on their own, from their own strengths of being. But all these works are that you're going to be looking at here, and this one too, are in a sense wheel directed. The primary tool of development of these works is the potter's wheel, and that dictates a certain kind of rigidity, verticalness, centeredness, and hollowness. The nature of clay is that it can only be so thick to survive firing and movement. And as I became more aware of my activity of as being a potter and being consciously aware of finally talking about it, one day I used to demonstrate pottery at the California State Fair, show and tell sort of thing. And I would do this during the summer for 2 weeks, making things, and fairgoers could come by the booth and see the works that were going on by a number of us that were working. At this time, I was affiliated with Mills College in Oakland, California. And one day after it was very hot, about 110 degrees in Sacramento, where the fair was being held. Lots of beer was drunk. Finally, I started making the most obvious kinds of containers. They suddenly appeared to be beer bottles thrown on the potter's wheel, and I would close them up with a little piece of clay and put a cap on them, make them a quart beer bottle. 1960, totally unaware of Jasper Johns, of course, because when he was making a beer can, it was not, you may have seen it here. And then we're doing a kind of a year or two later, proceeding from a beer bottle I'm no longer just a village potter. I have the notion of being more didactic about the nature of the material and what are those images that are paramount to the ceramic process, and what are those forms that are central to Western culture, particularly if you live in a suburban home. Any kind of house, you want to have 2 or 3 that are functioning. And also, ideally, which form can you conceive in your mind that has no artistic heritage? And so the toilet, as I'm sitting there contemplating, I went through a whole period of toilets and sinks, and we'll see. I did about 6 toilets, various kind of expressive powers of contemplation and scatological, juvenile experiences. Then moving on, going back to the beer bottle, suddenly a 6-pack. There's still an ongoing centrality to this whole process, and that's the potter's wheel is still a tool, and everything is being made on the potter's wheel, even the toilet bowl and everything. That's like a central beginning of centeredness and being inward in a sense of starting from a solid and blossoming out to a volume. I must have made assorted 6-packs and 6-packs with a bottle missing them too. You conceive of all the potentialities one could do with just 6 in a container, then you can go from here to there. And you could even do a full case, right, of course. Then there This one has an invader, of course. If you look closely, you'll see a real 7-Up bottle. Fellow traveler. And ultimately moved on to the sink. These are works of the 60s, 64. This sink has a hard to get out stain in the bottom. You'll see permanently inscribed. And the drop of water. And the ceramic bar of soap. So it's not quite so benign. Then the toaster. Not quite so benign. Early political works. That has a little swastika on the edge where you can put it, and there's fingers coming out of the top. And Crisco with the well-greased chicken bulging out. Then I moved on to the declaration of achievements and trophies. I actually had a whole exhibit of trophies at one time, and for all kinds of successful activities and unsuccessful activities, I must also say. And again, nothing has changed. Everything is thrown on the potter's wheel. And also in reference to the art world, totally overlooked. First of all, one is working in clay, so therefore one is not an artist. And that takes a lot of stress off your activities anyway. And secondly, you're doing these things, and you're definitely not an artist. Although there was an exhibit in 1964 and 65 in New York City at the Allen Stone Gallery, but Allen is sort of a real strange fellow. And the starts to make money. Also, a self-portrait aged a bit when I thought actually the value would be returned 40 years later from 1965. It's getting there. But I made dollars and 50-cent pieces and quarters. And my first self-portrait, 1965, again, everything is is ceramic and thrown on the potter's wheel, I guess. I just use the wheel because it allows certain hollow forms to be quickly created. This has an interesting story because the more I was trying to get it right by refiring it, reglazing it, the more I had a little crack starting to appear, and I fired again and reglazed it. Crack get wider, and I fired again. The crack get wider and wider till finally it was about 1.5 inches wide. And so I epoxied a lot of marbles in there, patched it up that way, created a title, Portrait of the Artist Losing His. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's too obvious. And then I started working with a body of work, a large body of work, dealing with the little house I had in Davis, California tract house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage. And this was actually the first major exhibition I ever had up to that time, where I cleaned out the house and had a weekend exhibit in the house, turned it into like a museum, and sent out a poster and had all kinds of art world friends from the Bay Area come up and spend a weekend gazing at this marvelous creation of jars, paintings, sculptures, drawings, all dealing with the house on Alice Street. I thought living on Alice Street was already fairyland. This is a house wall. It's about 7 feet high, made of glazed ceramic blocks. I think this is in the Craft Museum here in New York. Then we're giving you an overlay here of works. I moved on from there, did a little body of work emulating a colleague of mine at UC Davis, Wayne Thiebaud. So I started doing some food things, and that got a little bit too close to Wayne. So I thought I would just then do the whole thing, the artist as the chef, and the whole presentation of the Thanksgiving dinner, right, or the Christmas dinner, and a gigantic tableau of the artist. This is also a celebration, kind of an inward story of the artist being a ceramic artist, the cook, the chef. You make your goodies, and then you have to eat them right. And now I'm 1970. I'm starting to investigate myself as an image in the process of dealing with my environment in one form or another. And I thought I would do one, and I ended up spending an awful lot of years just using myself as a central motif. Not that I was psychoanalyzing myself, but only because I was comfortably there, and I could mirror, reflect, and model without having to pay. The artist as his own kiln, as his own creator, as his own baker of effigies of himself. The artist looking beyond, searching for distant wisdom. The artist working in the studio. Gives you a sense of the scale of some of those heads. The heads are hollow built. They're made like one would make a coil pot in a sense. In other words, the walls are about an inch thick. A work that's at the Whitney, actually titled "Whistling in the Dark," and it's a portrait of trying to capture a moment of uncertainty when one doesn't quite know from point A to point B, so one is whistling in the dark, knowing that there's a transition. A bicentennial work. This is really very appropriate, isn't it? Yeah. This is where art has ended up. This was for the bicentennial, 1976. George and Mona. And they are actually in the Baths of Coloma. Coloma is a gold mining region in north of Sacramento where gold was discovered. Moving on to paying homage to long-suffering artists. And in a sense making fun, but not really, because I must also pay homage to Vincent van Gogh. Now, of course, on the back here, I run amok a little bit, because up there in the upper right, you see a little slot there where you put used blades. And then in the heart, there's the straight razor. Making fun, but out of admiration. And you know Pablo Ruiz, scratching his own back, of course. Not that he had to, but it probably and the artist staying afloat. Thought this was a classic way to. There was an art problem years, that how to deal with a pedestal. If you make a sculpture, how do you deal? You just put it on a block. You do what? So I thought this was the ultimate solution to how you deal with a sculpture on a pedestal. The artist with his palette. And the artist does a commission. And you should never do this. But I did one for the Moscone Center in San Francisco. So I did a portrait of the namesake for the convention center, George Moscone, who was assassinated in office. And I thought I had a pretty good likeness, and I embellished the pedestal with all the issues that told about the story of his life and death. And Dan White sneaking into the mayor's city hall and blowing away the mayor with that sawed-off 38 that's impressed there in the pedestal. And old Danny Boy, and he also got Harvey Milk. But this got me in a lot of trouble. And eventually the piece was rejected by Dianne Feinstein, the surviving mayor. And so I had to pay a lot of money back and get the piece out of there. And I got in the doghouse, right? So I started reflecting on myself. Should never do that stuff again, Bob. You just got to get that mayor out of my hair. And there was a very interesting experience because the notion of making a work and then getting rejected in San Francisco, and after you were accepted, lots and lots of stories. But the whole event was played out on the front pages of the San Francisco Chronicle for 3 days. Like, nowhere in the world was anyone getting killed or planes crashing or anything else. So they had to just pick on this dumb artwork. And it became nationally syndicated and became Andy Warhol, famous for 15 minutes. That really occurred with that one work. And it was quite amazing. So I had to really reflect on the power that an artist might have as a podium. I'm reflecting here, of course, personally. I'm sort of redoing it in terms of myself because I can't reject myself. Right. Along about that time, there was a show at the Whitney Museum that ultimately got called 6 California Ceramic Sculptors that received quite a bit of publicity, and Hilton Kramer found one of the artists to be just out to lunch. And went on paragraph after paragraph after paragraph in the Sunday Times, just saying how awful the work was of this one artist. And I could only help, says, there's got to be a piece out of this article that he's been writing so rapturously about the decadence of art and the degenerate situation in California caused by, obviously, marijuana, the laid-back life, too much sun, and those Levi jackets and stuff. And so he painted a sculpture for me, which I eventually made. And I do have to give him credit for that because I wouldn't have made it without Hilton's support. And the artist fights back. This is dealing with Mayor Feinstein here. So I started dealing with images that would deal with the artist up against it. And the artist sort of as a sacrificial being, here I am with my own urn for my ashes to finally gather within. And eventually, I moved on to a much more political situation based on the fact that I thought I suddenly did have a podium to deal with. So I started addressing the nuclear situations. And this is an urn for Hiroshima. And on the top of that the form is like a hibachi, but it's also like a cooling tower for a nuclear facility. And the top is a map of Hiroshima at ground zero, about 7-10 minutes after the bomb went off. So I did a body of work dealing with, very appropriate, huh? I called that up, that siren, you know. As soon as I show that slide, there's got to be a siren come by. The bomb. The artist being political, the artist being a propagandist. The nuclear warhead, the various images of a head that could be a nuclear warhead. The head could be ground zero. The head could be dealing with the facts of becoming, what goes into making these things, what are the results. Like-minded souls getting together for the next great debate for nuclear arms. Must make the world safe. Then finally zeroing in on a particular kind of image called General Nuke with his phallic missile nose. And here's General Nuke in full command. That's a work called Ground Zero. Some of these works are now in bronze because of the nature of bronze can be very militaristic as a medium. That dark metallic look. A soldier. That's me, I guess. I was never a soldier. And that's a war memorial. Minuteman. Sarcophagus. Nuclear stockpile. A close-up. The kernels at it again. These are just some highlights. I can't keep showing too much of this stuff. I did these works from about 1982 to 85. And about 84, I started introducing another image in my work of Jackson Pollock, becoming more dealing with maybe the same images, but in a sense more dealing with the art, an artist and life and death and tragedy and creation. These are the Pollock's boots. They're about 40 inches long. And they have a recreation of one of his paintings, on his shoe. You know how artists like to go off, when you go to art school, you like to drip paint all over your shoe. And so everybody knows you're an artist. I didn't mean to say that's what Jackson did. Then down inside the inner soul, there's a statement based on Pollock's statement about his painting, portrait of Jackson Pollock. These are about 7 inches, terracotta. Why Jackson Pollock? If one has to choose, I mean, I'm interested in centering on a particular artist that I don't emulate in my own work, certainly, but I find that there's such a number of levels of interest in him. And one, of course, is the myth of the artist. And the second thing is just much more visceral, is that he's an interesting face. But certainly, in his time, before there was, quote, the big art market, he's a very interesting phenomena. Someone who's certainly world famous, but certainly struggling as an artist financially. Here's a column based on, in terms of the glazing effect, trying to capture based on one of his paintings. It's about 7 feet tall. And you're familiar with this painting in the Museum of Modern Art, the She-Wolf. And I've played with this a couple of times, looking at it and turn it into kind of an image of a cow and a bull crossing in a plain, and one of those images is Jackson himself, as if he were stalking a buffalo, like the Indians used to do, climb underneath the belly and move in slowly for the kill. And I call this piece Last of the Great Buffalo Hunters. And another work that I'm interested in, which I'm currently pursuing, is one called Guardians of the Secret, a painting owned by the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And it's always interesting to delve into a work that's been already created on one plane and explore it from the other plane, because you have to deal with it frontally, and you also have to then make a great deal of assumptions about what it's going to look like from the backside. There are no clues in the painting, of course. But this is a close-up of one of the Guardians of the Secret, the one on the left there. If you look at that head there, then we'll sort of a life-size study just of the head. This is probably a work that I'm going to get to ultimately to a life-size state, 6-8 feet high. Then the issue of Jackson's heroic life can't be heroic without a heroic death, right? Death. The car, 1950 Buick Oldsmobile convertible that he got from Martha Jackson, traded for 2 paintings. 1956, Jackson speeding in Springs. Misses a curve. Ruth, poor Ruth. So the pedestal has a lot of the imagery. Pollock, or Art is Dead. Myth of the Western Man. This is an interesting work. The head has this crackled surface, like the dry mud of the Southwest. Central Valley of California in the summer. A redwood pedestal base. And then the floor is a recreation of Jackson's studio floor with all the drips. I understand now this is a monument. I try to put the paint cans and the trimmings off of the canvases from the drippings. Born to Raise Hell. Jay and Young. Here's all the spiritual demons coming out. And the Night Wolf. And the last work that I'm currently involved with is this work here, which is a large head that's plaster and wax, preparatory for a bronze. And that's the first half of this evening's adventure. Thank you. Like a TV program I watched not so long ago. Is this working?
Yeah, it sure is. Bob, for a long time, you've been a teacher at Davis. I want just to ask you a little bit about your teaching there and what you want to convey to your students as a teacher.
Well, I think mostly that it's, if you are teaching young college students about art, that a sense of trust themselves. So much of art training tends to look at all the masters, and that art is always somewhere up in here, and it just might be right here, right in front of you, but you can't see that if you have no trust in yourself. You've got to go to the masters. And so I teach out of because I'm aware of that problem, because students are always tend to be programmed beyond art is Europe or art is somewhere else. One has to look elsewhere. One has to look within in the sense of trusting, just feeling good about yourself and what you do. No matter what, your art may not be great, may be quite humble, but if it's about you in some way, about your time on earth in this very particular epoch,
Now, your art also is pretty didactic in many ways.
Yeah, I think my art tries to illustrate that point.
I mean, the Pollock pieces have particularly fascinated me because, in a way, all of us have read a lot about Pollock and seen a lot of Pollock's work, and in some way think we've absorbed the kinds of messages we might be able to out of work that is, in many ways, very essentially abstract. Yet, I think for lots of people, you've made Pollock, in a sense, you've given Pollock nuances that maybe we didn't see before. I especially see this in the very, very newest pieces where you isolate imagery and begin to really let us see the parts of a Pollock as opposed to just dealing with it as an all-over composition.
I like Pollock because he is, in my reference, in my mind, the true American. Some guy that wouldn't go to Europe, didn't want to be trained in France, didn't want to take on all of the sophistication that a good European art education would give you, and probably looked down upon anybody that wanted that. He came out of the Western soils, and he didn't have a lot of tools to cope with. He wasn't gifted, really, but he had a marvelous soul. And the more I'm into him, the more I look at the work, and the more I can feel, I don't want to say I'm getting a lot of myself into that, but I can't help but getting a lot of myself into that. might even get confused as to who's who.
What have you
But
learned?
I'm living and he's not, and I've survived, and I haven't becoming the artist hero, and I haven't taken on the role of being that kind of attitude requires, which is a great deal of inebriation to get beyond your consciousness to an exalted state of awareness. I'm not willing to pay that price.
When we've talked about your Pollock pieces before, and then in turn about what Pollock has come to mean to you, you've said that you're now beginning to see more and more figures and other shapes and things inside the abstractions. Could you talk about that for a second?
Well, by the nature of what I'm doing, looking at those paintings, particularly the one I'm involved with now, Guardians of the Secret involves that I have to look at the work itself. So I'm suddenly becoming I'm not an art critic, but I'm certainly someone who is looking deeply into an artist's work, very deeply, for a year's time, and I'm starting to look at every stroke and overpainting what was there prior to that stroke. And then having to look at drawings that may have led up to that. So in a sense, I'm becoming an art expert on one level, and not an artist in that sense. But it's I don't know where it's leading, but if it's a strange kind of experience, and extraordinarily fascinating.
Well, in many ways, you've become a kind of three-dimensional art historian. I mean,
Well, I don't want to be. That sounds awful.
But in fact,
I'm not. I don't want to be an art historian. I want to dig into. I truly believe that there is a spirituality that exists within that painting. That has nothing to do with art history. Art history trots along from here to there and there. I don't want none of that shit. I feel that some artists are able to endow a work with a spiritual essence, and that's why it lives, why other works of art don't live. And I'm really curious about that fact, that how does that come about? How does a human being make marks that register a longevity of existence? So where does that mark come from? There's an unconscious marking, and then there's a counter marking. Art history is, that's about academia and about a certain amount of orthodox kind of involvement, and that creates that other art world, and I'm not interested in that. But I am interested in a spiritual marking that comes out of some kind of state of existence that an artist like Pollock, certainly in my mind, as I look at it, exemplifies. And so I'd rather say I'm a scientist. I don't want to be an art historian. I'd much rather be a scientist, because I want to look, and I want to through the microscope, and I really want to see those organisms and try to perceive their sources.
You're describing something that maybe
might be a germ in there, and I want to get to that germ. I think it might be a wholesome germ.
You're describing an activity, though, that is akin to art history. But I suppose it's an art history which is much more humanistically oriented. Not
it would
really.
Have to be, wouldn't it?
I mean, you're trying to look for spiritual essences. But when you've looked at Picasso and the take that you've had on Francis Bacon and the attitude, albeit somewhat sarcastic, that you've taken towards Van Gogh, in all cases, you're really getting us to look at those people as people.
Well, not really. I don't want
to.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, there's certain sarcasm too. I mean, there's a certain that's my shot at the art world too. I mean, I'm trying to bring some people down to my level, and that's a terrible level to be on, I realize, but that's a human level. And when it starts to get unbalanced, I think it has to be balanced out. And I want these other people to know that they walk along, and we all suffer. We all have our problems. existing as artists, and I'm trying to do that as well. So it's not always, remember we started earlier, I don't want art always to be up here, I want art to be here, I want students to see it's right here, right here. And once it gets up there, you got to let the air out, get it down.
One of the main issues that many people have thought about in relation to Pollock's work is kind of the myth of the West. And Pollock is this figure who emerged out of Wyoming and then out of California and happened to come back east and make, obviously, a remarkable statement in the kind of matrix of New York, but that he was a Western artist. You're a Western artist, too. Would you care?
I don't sand paint, though, do I?
No, you don't sand paint. But you work with clay.
Well, that's a non-art medium.
Well, we'll get to that in a second, but what's your take on New York versus the West? Your take on, like, you come here a lot.
Oh, it's an interesting place to visit, but you certainly don't want to live here, right? That's my take.
But in many ways,
it's an interesting place to come.
Do you think your art is happy in New York?
It's not necessarily happy because it doesn't seem to have. I don't know how it bounces off of very much of the stuff that goes on around here that's pushed in New York. So sometimes it's lonesome. You know, the art, it's hard to fit it in anywhere. He's not figurative. I mean, is he an artist? I mean, or, you know, he's one of those West Coast types, so you have to be shown in those galleries that tolerate a West Coast sensibility, which is basically a non-formal approach to art making. And, you know, we certainly have always rejected all that stuff that happened, you know, formalism. Andy Warhol's not recognized as a legitimate artist in my world.
Your world being what world?
Well, I guess it's that little West Coast Bay Area art world where there's another kind of sensibility that goes on. I guess it's called regionalism, provincialism. And there's strength in that.
But
there's weaknesses, of course.
But you can sort of sincerely consider yourself a regionalist.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I'm not embarrassed.
But I mean, do you want your work to be seen in those terms, or what terms?
I want my work to be seen. On all terms, of course. I want it to be seen, and I want a dialogue to go around about it, but I want it to represent a point of view. My point of view. It has to be me. That work is me, right? Whatever it is, it's me. As it sits there, that's the solid, that's the hard me, whereas I'm the fleshy me. It can only be that, and forever it has to be me. So therefore, I want me to always be in a dialogue forever.
Well, now, a couple of the ways that people have a tendency to look at your work and even to dismiss your work is to talk about this East-West thing, and then to talk about the craft versus art issue. You know, I think from many encounters that we've had over the years that, for me, any material you use in art is the material you're using in art, and there isn't a hierarchy that exists amongst materials, and it's either good work or it's bad work. For me, your work has really always been very good work, increasingly good work.
That's an important point. But the craft world and by the media orientation, also about the scale of the work, I think my work is a humanist kind of work. My work is not theater. My work is not opera. So therefore, it doesn't fit into certain current vogues in which art has to be opera and theater. It's just ill-suited for that. I think my work is best on a one-to-one relationship to another human being. And so the grand scheme of the current scene would not fit my work, and that's fine. It would be alien.
But your work does have a peculiar kind of equipoise, because on one hand, you have a curator like Neil Ben-Ezra, now of the Art Institute of Chicago, but originally in Des Moines, who puts together a show in an utterly serious way, completely taking your work out of any confine of a sculpture made out of clay or a craft or whatever. And then on the other hand, you're very willing, as you are in an upcoming exhibition like Clay Artist 1989 in Philadelphia, to put yourself in with that group. Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense that you belong in one group or the other?
No, cream floats. I mean, it's a terrible thing. Doesn't worry. Why worry about the kind of show? I mean, I'm not going to worry about that kind of show. I mean, it's an opportunity. They want my work in that show. I mean, why should I say, well, I'm an artist and not a... I mean, that's...
Some artists
there
do,
are a lot
course.
of good people that are going to be in that show that would say, no, I'm a craftsperson. I really want ceramics to be in this level. I have no quarrel. And there's no issue in my mind. Sometimes it's inappropriate for my work to be in those kind of shows if it is geared for those people that are dealing privately on works that might be what I call private works. A vessel, something you drink out of, eat out of, that are not meant to be philosophically engaged on another level. But I think my work, if it's philosophical, it's fine. If it's too personal, then it's inappropriate. So I don't know if you want to call it crafts. I think when a work gets really confined to, it has to be involved with an eating process or a drinking process. That any kind of exhibition space is awful. And I don't know how museums can rectify that problem. Art is getting too esoteric. I mean, there are those humble kinds of things that are very meaningful that, and I care about. So I just, by working in clay, you are part of that. And generically, at one time, I could only be seen through a craft type of exhibit. That meant your work was always shown on a coffee table, 3 feet off the floor. If it were a sculpture, it was 4.5 feet. It was 1.5 feet. I couldn't understand that. Kenny Price finally resolved that. He had a show at the Whitney years ago where he put his cups at 5 foot height. Those dumb little cups, they're just like this. And you could look at them as paintings, and they were superb. It was a superb exhibit of 12 Kenny Price cups. And it was a show in the 60s, and I thought that was marvelous.
Bob, what would happen if someone told you you were no longer allowed to make art?
That question actually originated with John Kennedy in 1961 in the New York Times, when he wanted to outlaw contemporary art. And that, therefore, all serious artists would become underground. How do I respond to that? I mean, you're going to do it. Is somebody going to shoot me?
Could you conceive of your life if you weren't making art?
I'd be awfully nervous. I don't call it making art, but I think it's just working, just doing something, staying busy, making marks. I think that's a better term. If someone told you you could no longer make marks, you could not record your existence on Earth, would you want to stay on Earth if no one said you could no longer make a mark of your existence? I'm more concerned with making marks and not making art. Like every day make a mark on something that records a meaningful kind of day.
Some of your most memorable works, and a whole group of them passed before our eyes as we were looking at the slides, were the group of works that you really dealt with, the anti-military, anti-nuke statement. Those were works which were made out of a perhaps even deeper place than some of your other work. I don't know that, and you might speculate on that, or you might respond to my speculation. But what effect did you hope those works?
Totally tragedy. Yeah.
What effect did you hope those works would have?
Well, there was two factors. One, I was consciously aware that I had a podium as an artist after doing the Moscone piece, that people paid it. No matter what I did, I was going to be paid attention to, and there was exhibitions that I was invited to. And why couldn't I infiltrate a museum with this point of view? So I thought I would infiltrate that notion. And I would do it I would sustain it as long as I could make interesting works within that realm. And eventually they came together with a couple of exhibitions that did circulate. But there's no way I can sustain that activity.
Well, I suppose what I'd like to get at is, can art change policy?
Well, of course. As if your art is part of you, and as long as you stand behind your art, people can change policy. And that's what else is going to change policy? You can change it by making your point known and speaking out. And the only way I can speak out as an artist is to make works that speak out. Other people can speak out on other levels. Of course we can change policy.
How would you...
You have to believe in that, or it's just going to be terrible.
How would you define the kind of response that people had to those works?
Well, the response is not within an art response, of course, because everyone is supportive. So you can't have a critical response. It's neither good nor bad, right? Thank you for doing that. And a number of very influential people that were involved in the creation of the nuclear bomb, I met and spoke to me and said thank you. So, I mean, I got a number of personal kinds of hits that were extraordinarily gratifying, that I was reaching a certain level. And I think not that all art can do that, but we're seeing today that a lot of current art is dealing with issues that are extraordinarily interesting about our existence. It's no longer decor.
Now, one of those pieces you did something...
Abstraction is dead, right? You're the curator.
Well, I think a lot of things are possible. But you did a very interesting thing with one of those pieces in relation to the Hiroshima Urn. Do you want to talk about that?
What did I do? I gave it to them.
But you gave a piece.
And with the stipulation that they have it available at the entry. General Nuke, because if you go to the Hiroshima Urn, you have to go right by the general.
So you took General Nuke to Washington.
That's where he belongs. I wanted him out in front of the Pentagon, but I couldn't get that sworn in. I want that commission. That's the only one I really want. My congresswoman was of no help.
Next month, Helen Frankenthaler will be coming in this series. Frankenthaler is on the NEA Council, a sort of small cadre of people who are appointed to oversee the national arts funding. What would happen if you were given that kind of position? What would you want to do?
Well, I tend to always run and hide when the phone rings like that. I don't want to. I must say I'm not very responsible in the art world that way. I tend to say no. that it takes away important time from my studio, and that I'm here only once. And I don't have an agenda that I want to address in terms of art politics that I can't do from my studio. So I have pretty much been a non-political, I'm really not a very, I teach, I work hard at that, and I do my art, and I figure that's all I'm going to do.
Well, clearly you've taken a political stand.
I don't like to fly to Washington. New York's all right, once a year. But
Now, you've had a disagreeable experience in terms of taking your work public, effectively. In terms
no,
of,
it's
of
never
the
been
Moscone.
disagreeable.
In terms of the Moscone situation.
It wasn't disagreeable.
Okay. How would you characterize what happened there?
It was very interesting, but not disagreeable. I mean, it's only when I was threatened, my life was threatened. That was the only moment of disagreeability. And that meant I couldn't sit by the window for about 3 days in the house. Because somebody says, I got a phone call late at night and says, you can go just the way Harvey went. So there's always a kook out there. And I says, well, I don't want to be a public person. God bless anybody in politics. It's a spooky world. There's somebody who's always going to call you with a weird message.
So,
behave yourself.
So, in fact, it was even more than interesting what happened as a result of that
I didn't get
commission.
shot.
No, you're sit here with us tonight, which is great. You're nearly 60 years old.
I'm only 58.
58.
I was just 58.
Yeah, you were just 58.
I was just 58.
You've had serious illnesses in your life. How does mortality and a sense of your mortality impact on your aesthetic?
Well, it makes you consider that the valuable time you have in your studio, and you want to use it valuably. You probably want to watch a step or two in what you do, what you put in yourself, and things of that sort. But one becomes a bit more mellow. I'm much more mellow. My cholesterol level went way down. I meditate, but I don't really consciously meditate. Now, isn't that a good? How do you meditate without meditating?
Yeah, well, maybe that's my next question.
Well, you just do it all the time. I mean, just don't allow a lot of things. Don't write answers to letters. Just don't go to meetings. Just this is a form of meditation. You just you don't go to that national council, the National College Association. You just don't show up at that. And it's a clearance, and it allows you to meditate. It takes away these hard edges.
You've addressed some very serious issues in your work. You've also looked at some of the remarkable artists of the past and, in a sense, given us your thoughts about Picasso, about Francis Bacon, about Van Gogh, and now certainly in this remarkable series of works about Pollock, one of the most sort of galvanizing figures in the 20th century for sure, and absolutely transformed our sense of what art is possible. Do you think your art will last?
Well, longer than I will. But it will last on what level, you're asking?
Yeah, on what level, and how do you address that kind of issue as you make your art?
It'll last. It won't rot by the nature of the media. So that could be its problem. Ceramics do last.
And bronze
good or
lasts
bad.
even
Bronze
longer.
is getting melted down.
Uh-huh.
You know that. All the great bronzes are gone from the Aegeans and everywhere. There are only a few bronzes around. But ceramics last on and on and on. So yes, I've taken care of that part of it. Paintings rot, everything goes, but ceramics goes on forever. 50,000 years. Anyway.
Now that Bob's immortality is assured, I'd like to open this up to some questions from all of you out there, because as you can see, I've been silenced. So, one of the procedures is that questions get written down. Another procedure is that somebody raises their hand and I call upon them. So are there any hands that are going to get raised? Yes, in the back there.
Bob, you work when you're angry?
Yes. And what?
Is your best work when you're angry? I get a feeling that a lot of you...
I don't know my best work, so I can't respond to what's best and not. You're asked if I work when I'm angry. I have worked when I'm angry, when I haven't been able to get to the studio, when I get out there. And that's probably the way I prefer the clay. You can socket, right? Clay's a therapeutic material. You'll find it all in all of the psychological tests in many institutions. Patients are encouraged to become centered, to address centeredness, and to record their impression in the material. So therefore, the clay could be therapeutic. I don't want to say that's in my case. So I won't.
To kind of take that question in another slightly different direction for a second, can you describe the state and the feeling you have when you believe you're doing your best work?
Well, no, you're talking about describing a sex act. I don't know if you can really do that. I mean, there's a continuing flow of energy going through, and you're not sitting around. You're not mesmerized. You're just energized, and you can't stop working. You can just go.
That happens a lot.
And it's not cocaine, you know. It's better than cocaine. It's just that energy goes. Does it happen a lot? No, I don't think it happens a lot. But the biggest problem with any artist is that they go dormant. They don't work. They do something else. And it's like an engine, and the engine gets cold, and you just have a hard time getting it started again. And you gotta almost tune the engine up, and you gotta sweep the studio. You gotta kind of clean things around. You gotta put something here. You gotta do something there, and you gotta do all of this spiritualization and getting the church back in order, so that you can have a vision again, or at least clarify it in your mind. So you have to do a lot of therapeutic work within the space you were involved with. Then you can get something going. But when you don't work and then you start work, it's difficult. I think I've talked to a lot of artists. That's always a consistent kind of thing. It's easier not to do anything, you know.
But you also work not every day, but you work very regularly when you're in Venetia.
If you go for a period of time that you've gone, it's so much easier not to. You know, there are a lot more interesting things to do in the world than go in a studio. There's people to go talk to, and there's shows to go to, activities to do. Art's not one of the great things to do. You do it out of a necessity, but I don't think you do it out of any other great rapturous thing, particularly when your engine cools down.
Yes.
Have you ever taught young children who don't have preconceived notions or judgments about what?
Well, I have, but
The question is, has Bob ever taught kids who are at a kind of pre-sophisticated stage?
yeah, I taught third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders, sixth graders, all levels. Mean like a Sunday art class, a Saturday art class, or an ongoing.
Freer energies.
I would always want to have a student that's not sophisticated. That's terrible when they're sophisticated. What can you teach them? They know everything.
Yes.
There really is no regionalism to American art except for the Bay Area artists. What can you attribute that to?
Say that again.
There's really, in her opinion, no way you can describe American art as regionalist, except perhaps in the Bay Area.
And that's because of the teaching institutions, I would assume. I mean, they gave David Park and Bischoff, Diebenkorn. I mean, they all taught out there, and even Clifford Still came out. I mean, so institutions were there, and also, you know, California is pretty open to anything. We're not nailed down. There's no button. California is the least buttoned down state in the union, right? So things can, an interesting idea can germinate there so easily. And since the artists were sustained by teaching, they were able to support themselves, and they didn't need market. So there was no art market, and they didn't need it. They can just do what they wish to do.
So in a way, a regionalism bloomed in Northern California, at least, because the artists could exist outside the marketplace.
That's my theory.
I mean, clearly you're not existing outside the marketplace now, though.
No, but I certainly existed. The university was my patron, and the university provided me with studio. The university gave me research funds to carry on my, quote, hobby, and they didn't really pressure me to do something other than what I was capable of doing, which was what I did. And they even tolerated toilets. I mean, can you imagine the university tolerating all that stuff? Getting your promotions showing toilets? Well, my university actually did that sort of thing, because there were other artists in the department who could also vouch for that. I mean, I'm sure without, Wayne Thiebaud being a colleague and people of that stature being, that I certainly could have, if there were just a bunch of art turkeys running around there, I could have been shipped out long ago. But I was at an agricultural campus, so we were allowed to germinate.
But you attracted an awful lot of people to Davis.
Yes. It was like being a football coach. You want to have students around, so you tend to want to go out and bring a few in that would be joy to be with.
Yes.
What were some of your responses to the art world when ceramic sculptures were not given respect or credibility? What did you say, or what would you have liked to have said to them that you didn't say?
What was...
When the art world didn't respect ceramic, the medium of ceramic as an appropriate medium for sculpture, how did you feel about that, and what did you?
What did I do?
How did you react?
Well, the art world. I mean, the Hilton Kramer's art world. I responded to that, made that California Artist as a director, because he was the voice, the loudest voice that I heard, speaking that point about not being acceptable. And he was real clear why, so I tried to be real clear in the work and response. But otherwise, you just keep working. I don't know what else. I guess the other thing to do is to quit. I don't know what I'd do. So I try to respond as wittily as I can, right? Because I thought it was, he had a few points that were well taken. And then I thought I would well take those points and return them.
Yes. Other questions?
Do you keep another idea in mind when you work on a project like this project that
Yeah.
will eventually give you up?
Yeah. Artists, when you're working in third dimension, there's a tardiness level there of having to tool up and working on something that's slow, and your mind is somewhere else. You're always got something else going while you're making something. So you see parallels, and I tend to make, even though I'm dealing with a nuclear imagery, I suddenly am working on Jackson Pollock, and I find a parallel there for some reason. And it starts out minor, then I eventually move major, and then the other ends, and then something else goes.
Do you keep it at the level of idea, or are you making drawings all the time?
Making sketchbooks and drawings are fast, you know. You can sustain your energy pretty quick. Drawings are marvelous because that's where I'm most fascinated by drawing. I like to look at artist drawings.
You've also got a studio assistant to help you realize some of your pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, he does all the things that I can't do anymore. He's part-time, and he works very well. I only have one, and he's only half-time. I don't have an army. But everything is touched by the artist.
Well, no, I wasn't in any way denying.
Well, I
Or
thought
suggesting that you weren't doing it all.
I'm not Jeff or any of those guys where it's just all sent out to Hong Kong for fabrication. It's, it has to, you know, if it doesn't have a thrill in develop, if it doesn't run up my spine, the work doesn't count.
Other thoughts and questions?
Did you know Jackson Pollock, and did it affect your?
Did you ever meet Jackson Pollock?
No, he died before I was an artist.
And how did you?
56. So I was a high school art teacher.
How did you get a sense of Pollock then?
Of recently, well, here's the story. Glad you asked. I go to the San Francisco Museum all the time, you know, and I look and keep looking, and they got these paintings, you know, got all this modern art, but there's always this one painting that keeps constantly looking like the best painting in the museum. And why is that? It's that Pollock painting of Guardians of the Secret. And how can one work just be the best in that collection? I mean, why is that haunting me? So I keep looking at it. And when it's not on exhibit, I feel lost. And so that's sort of the beginning of things, is to wonder, is asking myself, why is that work so powerful? I don't know. Why are the marks? I mean, you know, what's a painting, you know? Marks on a canvas. Why do some artists make a mark that has more significance than other artists? I don't know. So I'm trying to find out what's the significance there? Why am I drawn to that? What is the basis? And that particular, then you start looking at all the artists' work, you start going everywhere, you start reading everything, and you keep coming back to 3 or 4 or 5 works. In my mind, those works of Pollock's of 42, 43, 44, 45, where there's a psychological presence, and there's obviously imagery, and then there's imagery erased, and then new imagery reapplied, and so there's a layering of activity, and it's covering up evidence. So there's just that thrill of looking at a work, and I can still go in that museum, and they got everything, and that painting is it. It's not a giant painting by today's standards, but it's a giant.
Is there any living artist who does that for you, besides yourself?
Oh, thank you. So, sure, there's a lot of artists that give you a thrill. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Sure. But not on that level, because that takes a lot of time. But there's a lot of artists are interesting. It's one of the most interesting. I would hate to be in insurance or something, but even if the work isn't any good, or if you don't like the work, they themselves usually are quite interesting people, and it's nice. I enjoy talking.
Well,
to
you've
them.
done portraits of several of your friends, Bill Wiley, Robert Hudson,
My colleagues,
and a few others, and colleagues, and people who are your peers in the community in which you live. But the only living artist that I can think of that you've dealt with is Bacon.
Other than Wiley?
Well, other than the artists who are in your same peer group.
Oh,
Someone who doesn't live in your town.
live in my town. Bacon. Oh, was living. Okay. Well, you're the okay. What's your point?
I don't know. I'm just wondering. I'm wondering if that means that if there's any living artist who would have the same effect on you that Pollock might, it might to a slight degree be Francis Bacon.
Well, if Bacon died at the age of 46, he possibly might have had the same effect. But see, what would have Pollock done if he hadn't been killed? You know, he might just be god awful, right? He might be turning out some real figurative works that are just you go in the gallery, oh, Jesus, that guy used to do such marvelous work. But thank God he killed himself, right? So we're left with, we have a myth to deal with, and it's like the John Kennedy myth. I mean, you know, what would happen if Kennedy kept on being president, huh? Maybe yeah, or maybe not. We don't, you know, it all depends. So that it's the myth that creates the legend. And so I'm dealing with the myth, and I'm taking a point within that myth. Bacon, to go back on, has continued to paint, and not very interestingly so, because it becomes pattern making over and over. Once you got the line down, and he has a necessity to keep doing it, but I don't know why. And people probably saying the very same thing about me.
That you're repeating yourself.
Yeah, and you keep doing it. Why don't you do something else?
I think you are. Any other questions?
Yes.
Burning, yes.
What do you feel about Picasso's last 10 years? Can you see the show we have here?
What do I think about his last 10 years?
Work that he did during that time.
I'm not a Picasso expert. I saw a Picasso museum the last 10 years. Look, there are a couple pretty juicy works in there. The very fact of, oh man, I hope I can do it, right? At 90, wouldn't that be marvelous if you can just go out? That's like going to see Jordan McNeil and say, wow, look at this guy. He's going all the way back to the age of 9 and recreating these marvelous big paintings. That's just a marvelous kind of spark of, of longevity or recreation. It's not growing old, it's growing young. And it's an inspiration.
Bob, just one more thought. As I say, you have been a teacher, and you've been someone who really, I've even seen you in action at Davis, who has really taken an incredibly respectful attitude towards your students. We were joking about it at dinner a little bit tonight, and you were implying that wasn't the case. But in fact, you have this incredible sense of fairness towards your students. Have they given you a sense of optimism and hope, and in a certain sense, coming out of a series of works like the anti-nuke and anti-military works, and then some of the more dolorous parts and sort of morbid parts of the Pollock series of works? Is your mood optimistic?
Well, my dealing with students has to go much earlier, when my studio was a campus studio right adjacent to where I taught. So I was very much, for 15 years, an artist and a teacher all wrapped up in one. And I don't think I was ever a professor. So there were some crucial periods in there where we all shared ideas and we gave to each other. And I was at a young enough age where it was very enriching. That's certainly not what I'm doing now. I'm much more separated. So I don't have that closeness. It's a loss in one sense, and it's a gain for me. Not as young as I used to be.
When you've had a good deal of success, which I think it would be possible to say you've had, when you've had the retrospective, which really made your vision quite apparent, and it's a publication, its accompanying publication was a really wonderful opportunity to really assess what you'd done. In a sense, what are your aspirations for your art right now? What do you want to accomplish in the art that you're going to be making in the next 10, 15, 20 years?
That's one of the great questions.
Well, you'll be happy to know it's the last question.
Right. What do you want to do? You want to make it better. Right. Since you've already, everything that you've done's been recorded, you've got to be careful. Innocence is gone.
And you're competing against yourself.
Absolutely. And that's a great motivation. But I have so many things I want to do, so it's not an issue.
Well, we look forward to seeing them.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.